It's a debate that's been the topic of conversation for more than a year. Should NFL players be allowed to kneel during the national anthem? It started in 2016 with Colin Kaepernick. Since then, others have joined in. Players kneeling say that they do it to protest against police brutality and inequality. The NFL announced that teams will be fined if players kneel. If they wish not to stand, they could stay in the locker room. But now the NFL is pulling back and is working with the NFL Players Association on the policy both can agree on for the national anthem conduct. The discussion has even caused networks to decide whether they will air the national anthem before games. Joining me now to talk about this is author Michael Haig and former senior vice president of football operations for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Big topic that has just not gone away. I want some clarification here as far as whether or not players can kneel right now, since it is up for discussion what the policy will be. Can they still go out, or do they need to stay in the locker room?
Well, actually, the NFL really botched this. They came up with a unilateral rule without consulting the players, and then they got a lot of feedback from it and backlash. So the current policy allows players now, they can kneel, they can protest. There are no fines currently, and the NFL is doing what it should have done, which is going back and meeting with the NFLPA and trying to come up with a joint resolution.
And that's why these players have that players' union to obviously make those calls like, hey, we don't like this, we want this to be discussed further.
Yeah, and the NFL has a history of knowing that player activism's gone on for a long time. It wasn't that long ago that players didn't have free agency in the NFL. So the NFL knows that there's a procedure and a proper way to come up with policy that affects players.
So since they will be discussing a policy, is there a way that the NFL can kind of make it a little bit easier, ease the tension, I should say, for the people who are offended and say, hey, when they kneel, it's disrespecting veterans? Talk about that.
Well, I think the NFL can help by changing the narrative. I think what's happened is people have confused the purpose of the players' protests as if it's something that's to try to contravene their patriotism or something against veterans. And that's not really been the case from the beginning. So the narrative has been wrong. And, of course, the NFL didn't help when NFL owners got on the field and locked arms with players. Some kneeled with players. So I think the public's been very confused about what the protest is about. So they have to kind of clear that up.
I'm glad you brought that up. What does that do before a big game? When you're seeing some locking arms, some kneeling? I've played soccer for years.
Yeah.
I would think that would make me feel a little separated from my teammates, almost like the team's broken up.
Yeah. Well, I think every player has their own way. If you were inside a locker room before a game, you'd see some players with their headset on. Some players like to be quiet. Some players like to be with others. So I think every player has his own way of kind of getting ready for the game. But I think relative to the anthem, it's really important that we have sort of a uniform and consistent policy, or it will be a distraction.
So would it be a distraction at that point instead of the player being on the field, being back in the locker room at that point?
Well, it used to be that the players never did go out on the field, and the policy only happened when the NFL sort of embraced the whole military patriotism concept. But for many years, players were always in the locker room, and it worked very well that way.
Is there something else the players could do if they decide, you know what, no, you are going to be fined, you're not allowed to kneel, but maybe they still want their voices to be heard in a sense? What could players do that might be different?
Well, I think if they work with the NFL, again, helping the narrative to be clear about why they're protesting. I mean, the issue is very strong about injustices and killings of young black men and in the inner cities. That's a real issue. So I think the NFL has to work with players to make sure that these players who want to be activists and want to promote an issue in our society have an opportunity to do so.
Absolutely. I was going to say, let's delve deeper into that, because that is how this started.
Right.
And it did kind of spread into something a little more confusing. So again, just to clarify why these players are doing this in the first place.
Well, I think Colin Kaepernick started a great sacrifice to himself to draw awareness to an issue that was very important in the black community. And there have been a number of young black men that have been killed, and justice has not been served in many of those instances. And he took the individual risk to kneel and to bring awareness to that issue. He also donated $1 million of his own money. Other players followed suit. And then when he couldn't find a job back in the NFL, it created more of an issue. It looked like he was blackballed from the NFL. So the communication between the owners and the players has been botched. The message between the public and the players has been botched. And now the NFL is reworking the policy. So it's in a bad state.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.